Niamh, you're so welcome on the Happier at Work podcast. I've listened to you on a few other podcasts and I've been dying to get you on. So I'm delighted to have you as my guest today. Do you want to give people a little bit about your background, what you do now, and how you got to do what you're doing?
Sure. Thanks, Aoife, and pleasure to be here. Delighted. Um, so, my name is Niamh Hannan, and for your listeners abroad, that's Niamh.
Yeah, I have to spell my
um,
name as well. I can totally
yeah,
relate to that, Niamh.
it's the first thing, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm a chartered psychologist. And I'm a coach. Nowadays, I work primarily with women in leadership. But my background is I was working in counselling psychology as a therapist for 20 years. So I had my private practice in Dublin. Um, and I closed up shop after 20 years. That was 2019. And so retrained. I wanted to have a very clear delineation between counselling and coaching. I don't offer counselling anymore. I only offer coaching. So retrained in coaching, and then COVID came along. So that forced a quick
Fun
turnaround.
times.
Yeah, exactly. All the work. The other thing is, I suppose, besides the one-on-one work, I had always worked with companies and organizations, particularly in the well-being arena, doing a lot of talks and well-being, but also offering workshops and trainings for people as well. And then other kind of odd bits, Aoife, as well. So I was one of the chief kind of responders after bank raids for years. So a critical incident responder.
Wow. From a
Then
counselling perspective, is that so? With the shock and with the kind of
yeah,
terror, I suppose, that people feel if they've just
exactly.
encountered a
So
bank raid.
really, the whole idea there is the prevention of trauma. So you
Wow.
would be brought in, and now it was in back in the day, it was critical incident response. Nowadays, it's psychological first aid.
Okay.
I would have been, brought in usually about 24 hours later to a bank after a raid, for example, or to a workplace after a death or suicide of a colleague,
Yeah.
um, or if there were mass redundancies, those type of things as
Yeah.
well, and offered both group intervention and one-to-one. So I did that for years as well. So that all of that has kind of brought me to where I am today, where I work. Online a lot of the time now, but also again I offer one-to-one coaching. I also work with groups of women. I offer programs, and I love change and I love creativity, so I tend to create a new program every year. But I also work within organizations, still offering talks and workshops and trainings.
Brilliant. Love it. And I suppose, one of the reasons, or maybe actually where to start is because you mentioned that you don't do the counseling side of things anymore, that you just do coaching. And I know certainly when I was doing my coaching studies, one of the things that we had to do was to identify what the difference is between, say, counseling, coaching, and mentoring. And there may have been some, I think consulting, I think was maybe the fourth one, and
Yeah.
we had to really understand the differences. But there could be people out there who don't really understand what the difference is between the likes of counselling and coaching. And there's, from I suppose from what I've seen, and maybe it's just the people I'm connected with or the industry that I'm in, but I see loads and loads of coaches out there, and maybe people don't fully understand exactly what the benefit is or exactly what coaches do. So do you want to explain the difference?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. And it's not, it's not a very clear line in the
Mm.
sand because there are so many different types of therapy, I suppose. But there are also, coaches take different approaches too. For me, the key difference is that counseling really is a little bit more problem oriented. So
Yeah.
it's people come in at a different place. So very often for counseling, you're coming in at a minus because you're, not feeling yourself, you're struggling with maybe, trauma or mental health difficulties, or even anxiety, stress, depression, relationship issues. And very often the route of the therapist may be to go back into the past to help you to look and to help both of you to understand where this might have started, what's the source of this issue. Something might be presenting in your current relationship, but actually it goes back a lot further and your whole pattern there. So they're the two key things, I suppose, about counseling. Very often there is some kind of work going into the past.
Mm.
Um, and also then it's like you're coming in more at a minus. So, depending on the counseling, often it is about that kind of getting you back to normal. So it's almost like getting you back to ground zero so that you can go off and live your life as normal. Whereas with coaching, people tend to come in at ground zero and they have goals that they want to achieve to bring them up into the pluses, into the the more positive experience, more thriving, I suppose. So that's kind of the difference, I think, in the spectrum of where people come in. Also, for me, coaching is more structured. So, with somebody in the counseling process, you're not going to start off by asking, okay, so what's your goal for today? Where do you want to get to? Because
Yeah.
sometimes actually you might have to sit in some of the pain and the suffering, and you may have to kind of go through some of that really deep water first before you can begin to even look at what new shore might look like. With coaching, you're really always trying to define, what does that shore look like? Where do we want to get to? What difference is it going to make when you get there?
Yeah.
And so it's more goal oriented, and it's a little bit more of a structured approach in that sense as well. So that's
And
for me.
what prompted the move for you?
Um, a few things, I suppose. I mean, 20 years is probably, well, for me, it was enough in mental health and
Yeah.
mental illness. Um, Also, just with the type of person I am, I love, and I've only, more and more realized this, I suppose, even since I left, that I love to be stimulated. So
Mm.
even within counseling, I was always looking, like I was very committed to my CPD, my continuous professional development. And so at the beginning of every year, I'd kind of be looking ahead, going, oh, I wonder what new thing could I study this year? Or could I do this year? A new approach could I take? Or new work that I could do just to keep it interesting for me. Now, I was only counseling 2 or 3 days a week. I never did it full time. And again, this is just my personal story because it's going to be different strokes for different folks. But I was probably getting a little bit tired of it and losing interest in it. And I didn't want that to be the case for clients. I
Mm.
think that's not fair. So I made the decision, and I remember, like, I would have made that decision and started putting things in place of September the previous year. And it took until the following July to really close down and wind down,
Yeah.
because you needed to give clients lots of warning and not take on clients in the new clients in the meantime.
This is
Um,
the other thing.
the other thing is, I suppose, that as part of my work, I was getting asked to coach people occasionally, and I enjoyed that. I've probably more found my tribe among coaches, funny enough, rather than counselors or psychologists. Although I have friends in all of the above, but my kind of tribe sense of belonging is probably
Mm.
greater in coaching. So it was kind of a natural move for me.
Yeah, sounds great. And I suppose, Niamh, like one of the big things, and you touched on it in the introduction, and something that I'm keen to chat to you about is this idea of women in leadership and how do we help women in leadership. And I suppose let's not beat around the bush and be like and say that there's no issue there. I think it can't be argued that there is an issue. We need to get more women. We need to be able to support more women to get to those leadership positions. So, any thoughts on maybe where do we even start?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, Aoife, because I felt the draw to work with women in leadership over the past couple of years, and what I've noticed in myself is kind of a refining of that.
Hmm.
So what I've realized, or what's maybe become more clear for me, is that I'm not I'm not particularly motivated to just get women to the top
Yeah.
if they're getting to the top of what can be a very toxic system or a broken system. Um, so I'm not interested in supporting women, I suppose, to be more male than the men, and climb on top of others to get there. Really, I'm interested in supporting the feminine and empowering the feminine, and that doesn't just that's not about eradicating the masculine. We need both, but I suppose our world has been dominated by the masculine for thousands of years, and the masculine characteristics even have been more valued. So we live in a very competitive world, and that's not always healthy. So there's healthy competition and there's very unhealthy competition. If we look at war, really is a very example of very unhealthy competition and conflict at its extreme. Um, and I suppose I have just that sense or belief that it's time for the feminine to come more into the world and to be
Yeah.
valued. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're half the population.
Yeah.
We're doing what we do,
Yeah.
but it's not valued. And
Mm.
so our voices aren't being heard, we're not being seen. And even when a woman does the same thing as a man might do, it's not valued in the same way. We're only beginning to recognize, women's contributions historically in science or in technology, or whereas, we could list loads of famous men for inventing
Yeah.
this, that, or the other,
Yeah.
coming up with
Yeah.
these
Yeah. Yeah.
ideas. You know,
Totally. Totally.
um, so yeah, I suppose it's again, it's not about replacing the patriarchy with the matriarchy. That's not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really about bringing more balance in.
Yeah, I was going to say it's about finding the balance between the two, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'd love to kind of explore that a little bit further. That, and I totally on the same page in relation to this idea of the masculine, the feminine. What would you consider to be the more feminine qualities that need to be recognized and valued a little bit more in society, in the workplace?
Yes, well, thinking about that, I mean, if we look at, one of the, I suppose there are lots, and collaboration as opposed to competition is
Yeah.
one. Um, for me, it comes down to probably my core value since I was 15, when I consciously chose this before I ever knew about values. Love, coming from a place of love. And, both as men and women, we need to be doing that more. And I know your listeners are going to possibly kind of go, love, what the hell is she talking about
Yeah.
there?
In the workplace? No.
So for me, it's about, like, everything I think can be boiled down to, you're either coming from love or you're coming from a place of fear.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and we're making decisions moment to moment throughout the day. We have interactions, moment to moment throughout the day. And in everything that you do and in your whole approach, you are either coming from a place of love, which is a higher vibration, or a place of fear, which is a lower vibration. And, if we want to be happy at work, then we can't be operating from a place of fear.
Yeah.
Um, but really, our whole, a lot of our systems and institutions are set up, run through fear. Um,
Yeah.
and
Like even
that,
thinking about the news, like I haven't watched the news in years, and before the pandemic, even I just don't watch the news. I tend to get my news and see the headlines from social media, which sounds really bad, but I kind of get the main points, or from my friends talking about it in WhatsApp groups and things like that. But the news for sure is something that is fear mongering. We don't really talk about the good news. We tend to talk about the bad news and the bad things that have happened in the world. And it's not, I suppose, about being ignorant about what's going on around me. It's more about, I don't want that drilled home like in my brain, and it's what proportion of all things that happen in the world are these bad things, and they get escalated then to, again,
yeah, and
probably talk about that on another episode.
I know there's loads of things I could pick up on there, because um, actually, I mean, we hear more now because of global communications and social
Yeah.
media. We hear more now about the negativity, and bad news sells, good news
Yeah.
doesn't sell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on a day when there's like a world disaster, news will sell and the news stations will be watched 24/7. So the worse the news, the more tragic, the bigger impact, then the more it sells. So bad
Yeah.
news sells, first of all. The other thing is that gives us the impression, because we're hearing from all over the world, that
Mm-hmm.
we're that things are much worse now than maybe they've ever been, that we're living through an awful time, all this bad stuff happening.
Mm.
There's the climate crisis, there's the energy crisis, there's the war in Ukraine, there's just, there's protests in Iran, there's just so much going on. Oh my God, this must be just the worst time ever. And actually, you know, if to counteract that, there's a whole lot of facts that show we're probably better off than we've ever been. There's more people living longer. Infant mortality is greatly decreased. Mothers live longer. There's just so many different things where, yes, there's hunger in a big scale where there shouldn't be, and yet it's
That
not
good
as
news
global as
doesn't
it
sell
ever
though, Niamh.
was. There's just so much of that. That actually we're probably living in the best time ever. It's
Yeah,
not the dark ages.
yeah.
Um, but we
But
can be led into believing that.
I like what sprung to my mind when you talked about the bad news sells. Is it the case then, say within organisations, that fear sells as well? So it's kind of the fear mongering. And if I think back to my corporate days, and we're talking about the results, and oh, we've got X amount of a gap, as opposed to focusing on, and look how much we've achieved so far this year. And with that focus, and again going back to your idea of decisions being made from a place of fear rather than anything else, um any thoughts around that, and how I suppose how fear is perpetuated.
Yeah, yeah. It is because we tend to take, and I mean, if you look at even certainly in this country and other countries, how governments are selected, it's always a short-term view. And companies are run for for capitalism, for the shareholders, for, getting more books out at the end of the year. So that's a really short-term view, and that's what's got our planet into the trouble that it is. Because if I'm only thinking in the short term, as in, how much money are we going to make this year, are we going to get our shareholders happy this year, or even in a 5-year plan, that's really short term.
Mm.
In the life of a company, in the life of the earth, and the impact that we can have, and the impact that many, many companies have had on the earth in a negative way. Never mind the people. So we there is always, I suppose, yeah, things are run by fear, and what we have is, you know, epidemic rates of depression, anxiety, and stress, and burnout. Um, we have, the planet where it is right now as a result. So yes, maybe it makes money in the short term, or it motivates people quicker than maybe, praise or compliments might. But in the long run, we're killing ourselves
Yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And we're, there's the great resignation happening, of course, as well. In many ways, like COVID brought on a lot of fear for people. It really, brought us into the world into, a kind of a global fear response. But it also brought us together. And there's a lot of industries have been negatively impacted, of course, by COVID. And still, the other side of it is that it accelerated change. If we're talking about women, it accelerated change for women and for families and for men too. Like I see now more men on the school runs in the morning, or out pushing a pram, in the morning,
Mm.
because they're able to work from home.
Yeah.
So that was needed, and that was going to take forever, but COVID accelerated that. Um, my concern after COVID, like this year, when I was speaking through COVID, I was speaking in a lot of companies around, how to mind yourself through the whole pandemic and lockdown, working from home, and all those changes, and the impact that had on people. And one thing that I kind of consistently maybe pushed is that this will change again, and we need to go back with our eyes open. We need to take what we have learned. We've learned how to slow down. We've learned that actually we prioritize people, the people that we couldn't see, through COVID, often parents and grandparents you couldn't see, friends. And we realized how much we needed those connections with other people.
Mm.
And we got clearer maybe on what's really important to us, which wasn't having loads of money in the bank when you're sitting at home and you can't spend it in COVID.
Yeah.
It was people, it was connections, it was
Mm.
relationships, it was health. Um, and my kind of warning at the time was, can we hold on to this learning and can we bring that with us?
Mm.
So we go back with our eyes open and a little bit more consciously and redesign our future with our eyes open consciously. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that, like, this year, it's like people, that the world has gone back to, in many ways, where we were, but it's actually accelerated. It's like
Mm.
this. It's like the pace has just sped up to something that is spitting out people left, right, and center. Because it's kind of like they're going around in a wheel, being tossed around, and they're eventually being flung out.
Yeah.
Um, there's huge exhaustion and burnout. There's a lot of illness as a result. So I would say, yeah, there's a lot broken about our workplaces, and I think we're going to possibly hit a lot more crises. And COVID has shown us that, okay, there's opportunity in crisis, and that maybe the crisis have to happen for us to make the necessary change.
Mm. Well, I mean, we've slightly gone off topic. We'll come back to the women in leadership in a second, but I'd love to drill a bit more into what you're seeing in relation to demands being placed on people, demands back to the office for 3 or 4 days a week. I think, it's safe to agree that a lot of companies don't really know. They're trying to navigate this new way
Mm.
of working. And what I always say to the companies that I work with in relation to this is, they're like, oh, what's company down the road doing, or what's everyone else doing? What are the best practice? There's no best practice. You need to do what you're doing. You need to ask the people who you're working with, and you need to listen, and you need to monitor, and you need to be agile and change over time if things need to change. But there's no kind of one solution for everyone. You need to think about what different parameters you have when it comes to work. What work needs to be done together with other people? Can they do it effectively collaborating online, or is it better, or do you get kind of better outcomes if you bring people together into the office, and really bringing it back down to that individual level, individual teams, individual work that needs to be done? I think, sorry, I'll get down off my soapbox now in relation to that, but I'm seeing a lot of this, posted on social media, and again, they're probably only the handful. And then of course you see the redundancies and things like that are happening because people are saying that they kind of overshot during COVID, and now we're heading into a financial crisis or a recession, or however you want to term it. Any sort of thoughts on that in relation to, well, wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity to learn to slow down, learn to connect a bit more with people from COVID times, and then how is that impacting then on the world we're seeing today?
Yeah, so look, first of all, I absolutely share your sentiments there. And there's maybe a few different places that I can respond.
I suppose thinking about what you said in relation to COVID, and COVID is the perfect opportunity, and talking with companies about their well-being and saying this is an opportunity now to realize what's important. And fast forward to now, and what we're seeing out there is people being called back into the office full-time, mandated back to the office, should I say, as opposed to thinking about creating an environment where people want to be. But then and the
Yeah,
redundancies and things that we're seeing, and again, that could be fear mongering, because I'm sure it's not every company that's doing that, but it's kind of what we see in the news. It's
that's
what
what
we're
we hear
seeing
about.
out there.
Yeah.
So any I suppose is it worth thinking about how do we still take on those learnings that we had from COVID, and how do we bring more of that back into work, and how do we recognize when we're veering away from that sense of well-being that we had, um, when we were being a bit slower at work.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we were being slower, this is the
Yeah,
other
and
thing.
this is,
Not
yeah, it was
everyone
different
was.
strokes for different folks. So and depends on the industry that you're in, and we're in during COVID. I certainly wouldn't have liked to have been, a frontline worker. They haven't
Yeah.
had cause at all. But for the majority, maybe working in, in offices, type, the 9 to 5 type jobs. I think the word that's coming to me is choice, and we need to be we need to feel like we have some autonomy, that we have some control, that we have some choice. And so when people are mandated back to work, that goes against that sense of autonomy,
Yeah,
and of course then you get resistance, and what happens then is you get disengagement, and you
yeah,
people resign or move to where they perceive they will have better choice. And I think choice is becoming more important as a result of COVID. We want flexibility, we want more choice, and we have to keep moving in that direction. So, in some tech industries, for example, or companies, there may be 100% online, and that's working really well for them. It's maybe more complicated in other types of jobs where you have different types of teams and doing different types of jobs, and so some need to be in there and some could be working at home and some
yeah.
can come in and out, and
That
how
it seems unfair.
yeah, it
Yeah,
does. And yet it is exactly what you've said. This is a transition period.
mm,
If we look at it as a transitionary period, that we're testing out new ways of working.
yeah,
We don't have the roadmap. We want to throw away the old maps, and we have to pioneer our way forward. And if you take that kind of mindset, really, that okay, we're pioneering something here, and maybe the whole world and all the companies are pioneering together at the same time, nobody's really ahead of each other here. So what do we want to create? And this is what I mean about going into things with your eyes open and conscious minded, because
mm,
it's like, well, we are creating here, and we have to be careful that we're not just reacting like, okay, this didn't go well last month, so we're going to mandate everybody to be in now, or that's just reactive and again, fear. Um, Instead of kind of taking that bigger picture, the longer term view, how how do we want our workforce to be? What kind of culture do we want in this workplace?
mm.
Where do we want this going? What level of engagement even do we want a happy workforce, or do we just want them, to be cracking the whip? Um, and if we take that longer
I know the answer to yeah, from my perspective, but that's yeah.
exactly. Well, preferably you wouldn't want to have to crack the whip. So
Yeah,
maybe, you need to make some changes and take that longer term view of, okay, so if we're pioneering something different here, we're not going to necessarily get it right on the first go.
mm,
And that's rather than aiming for perfection and control, aiming instead of let's take an attitude of curiosity here.
mm,
Let's try it and see, and we'll continuously monitor and review. And 6 months to a year later, we can adapt and make changes, but we need to give it enough time one way before we start reacting and making
yeah,
more changes again.
yeah.
It hasn't been enough time to
No,
really look
no.
at,
But equally, stop looking at what other people are doing. And especially, when these companies are getting all this press about mandating people back to the office, I don't know what sort of signal that's saying for other companies then in order to follow. Um, but I suppose coming back then to what we had originally started talking about, and this idea of more of the feminine at work, more of the kind of feminine qualities, and how do we go about valuing that more? How do we go about bringing more of that into work?
it's an interesting one because if for years, really, if you look at Forbes, or HBO or whatever, the research coming out and the top skills and qualities needed for leaders for 2023, or the year ahead, a lot of those qualities and characteristics that are coming out are to do with emotional intelligence, and many
Mm,
of them are
yeah,
typically seen as more feminine skills. So empathy, the nurturing, the caring for each other, like most of the caring professions are overloaded with women. There's plenty of men in there, but definitely hugely female dominated, like
yeah,
nursing, childcare, caring, carers around the country,
mm,
nursing homes, physiotherapy, therapists of all kinds, really, whether holistic or psychological. All they're all caring for other people, and they're all undervalued
mm,
in our society. And yet that allows our society to operate. It allows the rest of us to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Having people to care for our kids or our elderly or are sick or are vulnerable or people with disabilities, you know, that allows the machine to keep rolling. And yet that's being undervalued. So it's just so many levels, I think. And even if we look at characteristics, and we know that the science is saying, well, actually, this is what we need in our leaders. We
Yeah.
need empathy. We need the people skills. We need people to care. We need people to collaborate and to listen and to share and to cooperate. And we need that psychological safety. I mean, that's huge.
Mm.
Um, we need alignment with values. So the science is all there telling us this, but on the ground, it's just not happening yet. Not that I see anyway. I mean, I don't think, excuse me, I'm still not seeing leaders, sorry, being promoted for their empathy and people skills.
Mm.
And yet that's a huge part of, building the workforce of the future. Excuse me. So on the one hand, we have the science, but on the other, it's not being applied.
Yeah. So if the likes of, HBR and these big weighty
Gallup and
publications
Forbes, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and if they're saying all of this, then why is it not being applied? Or is it being applied but only in a select few companies? Or is it those big companies and dare I say the big companies with the big budget? So it's well for them that they can do that, but actually, what about me and my smaller operation? I can't actually do that. Like, I suppose, what are the excuses? Or is it the case that it's a complete and utter mindset shift? It's a mindset overhaul for organizations, especially where it's predominantly men in leadership positions with those masculine qualities, and I'd love to come on to some of those now in a second as well. But any thoughts on, if this is what the science says, why isn't it happening?
I think a lot of it is, it's about investing in our leaders probably first,
Mm.
and it is a mindset shift. I mean, there's probably quite a lot of mindset shifts that are needed. But if you're investing in the people at the top and helping them and choosing them because of different qualities that they bring, and different mindsets that they bring, that will bring us into the future. That if you're selecting your leaders and then supporting them through coaching and development to develop from the inside out. And I suppose that's where my real interest is. It's not about coaching skills and the outer work really. It's more about, for me, the doing the inner work.
Mm.
And so this is where it's the person that comes into the professional. So people avoid that. Some people are genuinely motivated to evolve and grow as a person.
Mm.
There isn't necessarily that culture around us, in this country or in any country that I can see so far.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's certainly not the norm, really. And I would like to see that the norm, because I think
Yeah.
that's where the answer lies for everything. If
Yeah.
we need the world to kind of awaken and wake up a little bit and raise our consciousness levels.
Yeah.
But even that,
Interestingly, this has come up so much on recent conversations on the podcast episodes that have been recorded but not necessarily released yet. It's coming up time and time again about how we need to work on ourselves and how we need to do our own inner work. And it's not about blaming other people or blaming the situation you find yourself in, or it's about taking, stepping up and taking personal responsibility for what you own and what you can do, and be motivated to change despite how hard it is, because it is hard to look at ourselves and our faults, and to look at all the things that have gone wrong for us maybe up to now, and take personal responsibility for those. And I'll be turning I was going to say a ripe old age. I'll be turning 44 tomorrow. It's my birthday. And so when this is released, it'll be a couple of months later. But, you kind of get to an age where you're like, I can't do it now, it's too late, or I can't do it now because that requires me to take personal responsibility for not having done this at the age I'm at now, whatever age you are. I don't know, am I
Never
kind of
too
talking
late.
around in circles
Never
here?
too
But
late. Yeah.
yeah,
You can only start from where you are.
exactly,
So whether
exactly.
that's when you're 18 or you're 88, you
Yeah,
start from where you are now. You
yeah,
can't we can't go back in time. We can only start now. And isn't it
yeah,
better to take it from now and moving
yeah.
forward um, with
I
awareness?
always love the phrase. This it's an old Chinese saying. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, and like you say, Niamh, it's never too late. It's never too late. And I think once you become aware of that, it's really hard to not be aware of that anymore. And you need to then start doing the work and the
But it
inner
is,
journey.
and it is about taking, radical responsibility in a sense for our own lives, for the impacts that we have on our own happiness and well-being, but also on other people around us. Because when you're in a leadership position, you have an impact, whether you like it or not. You are impacting on other people.
Yeah,
So when you do that consciously, then at least you can have a positive impact on people, because unconsciously you may be having a negative impact on other
yeah,
people.
yeah,
And it can ripple out and out, because, then if you're having a negative impact and you have a negative impact on even one person that day, how many others do they affect? It causes this huge ripple effect.
yeah,
And then somebody's coming in worse form the next day, even though you
yeah,
might be in good form, they're in bad form as a result of what happened yesterday.
yeah.
You're not coming in, and there's just it's that kind of lack of personal awareness really is dangerous, actually.
Mm,
Um, but and of course we come into the workplace, we bring ourselves, and yes, people often have a professional self and they may be more pleasant to be around in the workplace than they might be at home. um or and it's interesting because I do a lot of emotional intelligence work with people, and they might say, yeah, I score pretty highly on some of these things at work, and I think people would think pretty highly of me and my communication skills, for example, different things. But if you went home and asked my wife, she'd probably say something very different.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
My partner.
That's
Um,
interesting. I wonder why is that?
mm, I think again we're at home, we're with the people who are safe, so we generally, will lower our guard and be more reactive, and of course we all know each other's little Achilles tendons in a
Oh,
family, and
so
push each other's
we'll
buttons.
deliberately nitpick at
Yeah,
that
or there's
Achilles.
there's reactive patterns set up.
Yeah, yeah,
And you've been with each other since whenever, so they get set up in the workplace. They can also get set up, and that's when we see, um, you know, real conflicts between colleagues, or bullying and harassment,
mm,
um, and so again, it's kind of like creating that safe place. But yeah, it is an interesting one how somebody can kind of switch on some skills in the workplace, but it
yeah,
is, that it's not personal when you're in the workplace. When you're at
yeah,
home, it's personal.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It can get personal in the
yeah,
workplace too, of
yeah,
course. Um, but just to come back, I suppose, Aoife, what I really believe in is working with the leader from the inside out. So
yeah,
developing you as a person, because leadership skills can be learned anywhere, but it's that awareness. And I think it's really important, like in coaching, whether I'm working with an individual or with a group, creating a safe space so that people can and do feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to, in a sense, expose themselves for who they really are and for what they really feel and for what's really going on.
mm,
That doesn't happen in the workplace.
yeah.
And it often doesn't happen at home either. So, in fact, a
Okay.
lot of people don't have any setting for that to happen.
Mm,
And until we value that, we're not going to get that waking up.
Okay.
because there's so much you can do on your own, but a huge amount is learned in relationship, or with that other person's perspective. Maybe
Mm.
having it may be a coach or maybe a mentor who's kind of ahead of you in their journey, whether that's their work journey or their personal journey. You can learn from somebody else too.
Brilliant. I love that. And I suppose, like one of the things that struck me earlier in the conversation was this idea of competition and it being a very masculine trait. And how do we move more towards collaboration, especially in the working environment where we're competing for everything? We're competing for promotions, for resources, for money. There's how do we shift that thinking into more of a collaborative approach?
Mm. I'm not sure that I have all the answers either. I suppose my sense is that this is a huge system. It's a way of being in the world, but that, I personally didn't set up, you personally didn't set up, but we as human
Mm.
beings have set it up this way.
We're
So
experiencing this. We're kind of part of that system.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
we're part of the problem, and that means we're part of the solution. So, um, individually, if we all take our responsibility, then collectively, and we can change the system. It's not about fixing the system. I think it's about allowing something very different to emerge and tuning into what it is that wants to or needs to emerge. One individual doesn't have to have that answer. That will come out from, when you have enough people in coming from the right place and operating from that place of maybe uh, love or care for each other, or the right mindsets even are in place, then new ideas start to form. You will, this will be innovated, a new way of working. And I think there are probably plenty of companies out there who are already innovating ways of working. The 4-day week, there's a lot of research
mm,
being done on that, for example. Um, so it's not that this is not happening on some level. It is, and it's just hasn't maybe reached a tipping point at all yet. There's still a long way to go. There
yeah,
will be at some point the tipping point where because we're seeing the old crumble and be challenged. We're seeing institutions falling. We're seeing, abuse of power in all its forms is being exposed, is being called out. And there's still, of course, that doesn't mean that that's still not happening, that abuse of power. It's still happening. But it's maybe getting harder for it to be hidden. And there's more in place. So there have
yeah,
been huge shifts and changes,
yeah.
and we need to continue with that.
Yeah, really interesting. I think, yeah, that's a really, I think, positive way of looking at it. There's loads of stuff that's happening out there, and we just haven't reached the tipping point yet. I think when we do get to that tipping point, it's individuals are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to leave organizations where they're not seeing that collaborative approach, where they're not seeing, where things are a little bit more aligned with how they want to be, how they want to work. They want to have that greater flexibility. They want to work reduced hours, focusing on outcomes as opposed to like specific tasks, and did you achieve the task or not, and having a real meaningful impact on the world. I think that's
Yes.
another sort of big change that I'm seeing, that you know taking the focus off ourselves and looking back into, okay, what is the impact that I want to have on the world, and what is the impact I am having on the world, and how do I have more of that impact? And I think collaboration, as you kind of alluded to in relation, that collaboration is the way to achieve that. So it's not
Mm,
the individual change that I'm going to make, it's the who can I collaborate with who are doing similar things in the world, and how can I make that change? We're getting very philosophical all of a sudden, and I feel like
yeah.
we haven't really uncovered this idea of, how do we support more women, or how do we support more feminine in the workplace?
Yeah, so I suppose first of all, to respond to what you were saying there, and something earlier that you mentioned about, okay, it's maybe these really big companies that have all the money and it's easier for them to make the changes, but actually the big elephants are slower to move around,
Good point. Yes. Yeah.
whereas
Yeah.
often it's the startups, and even in this country, like entrepreneurship,
They're a bit more agile.
self-employed,
Yeah.
they're like that's the backbone of the SMEs really.
Mm.
So there's it's possibly easier to be versatile when you're small. It's easier to be agile, and so you know there it's maybe it'll happen at a grassroots level, that if we have enough people, even whether they're just themselves working or, as you say, in collaboration with others, community.
Mm.
I think community is really important there. So we create systems. A neighborhood can be a community, or it could be a system. And so within a workplace we have the system, and it can become a little bit us and them. But if we are creating the community and the system in the way that we want, and that is taking into account, like coming into alignment with what's really important to us
Mm.
and our values. When we work and operate in alignment, then we're going to be more engaged, more motivated, and more inspired. Um, we're going to be happier and doing more of what we love. And when we're in that good place, then we're in a better place to give back and to care about the community and the environment and other people. So you often see with like the very successful people that actually at that point they start really caring about and becoming philanthropists and what can I do, because at first it becomes about survival, and then secondly then it's like, okay, once I'm surviving and I'm okay, well, what can I do for you? So we do have to help people to get past that survival point where they're just fighting for survival, and then that's how you help people to maybe care for others or for the earth. If they're still fighting for their survival, then they're going to compete against their neighbor for the scrap of food that's there, or the bit of oil that's left in the tank, or whatever it might be. So we do have to look after those kind of basic needs. And as a society, we need to and we're probably not too bad in Ireland at that traditionally, at least we have healthcare and things like that in place. But there's other countries that are so far ahead of us in that way, that when we look after the basic needs so that everybody is looked after, nobody's hungry and nobody's homeless, then everybody can start to go beyond themselves and build that community and work towards something like a higher purpose, as such,
Yeah.
that whether it's the earth, the planet, animals, mankind, the shift towards a better way of working. So yes, we have got very philosophical. So coming back to your question then about how can we help women in the workplace, I think we all have to maybe hold the mirror up a little bit and um, constantly build awareness of our own mindsets and belief systems. I mean, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. When I look at the kind of limiting beliefs that I was brought up with, that were so normal and so ingrained, that I have to be conscious and aware that I don't have my own bias in there, because that was such a part of my childhood.
Yeah.
It was so normal.
Mm.
We had the Carry-On shows and the Benny Hills, and that was normal. Women were objects so
Yeah.
much.
Mm.
And so that infiltrates us at an unconscious level, and we can still be operating from that kind of place today, unbeknownst to ourselves, men and women. Even if you consider yourself a feminist or pro women's equality, you could still have those unconscious biases. So it's really building that awareness and becoming aware. And I'll tell you, I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, so they teach me stuff
Yeah.
because they're not being brought up in the same environment at all. Things have changed, and and they'll call it out and they'll see it much faster. So we need to kind of listen to that and nurture that, because they're the workforce of the future. They're
They're the
not
next
tomorrow.
generation coming
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
This is it. This is it.
Um, so I think supporting, our boys and girls now, geez, in like 10 years' time, they join the workforce. It's not long. It's not long. So we'll see those changes happening. So that's certainly one way I think is look after our
Yeah.
children and nurturing the kinds of mindsets and attitudes that they're being brought up with. Um, you know, being their emotional coach, helping them to navigate their emotions and express their emotions so that boys aren't learning that boys don't cry,
Mm.
or that girls aren't learning that you can't be angry ever. Um, so changing those kind of old values that don't serve us anymore. It's not about changing things overnight. There's world shifts, global shifts needed.
Yeah.
So, and they are happening in different ways, and we can all do it, our part, by being more conscious with our own attitudes and value systems, those of our children, what we bring into the workplace, shining a light into those dark corners so that the unconscious becomes more conscious and we see what we're doing by paying, the childminder less, or the cleaner or whatever, all of these things.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And I think, something that occurred to me when you were talking previously is this idea of it's perhaps it's making individuals aware that they do have a choice, that if they find themselves in a situation where they're not being recognized, if they find themselves in a situation where there's bullying or there's unethical things happening at work, that there's somewhere else out there. And I think sometimes when we're stuck in that type of situation, we don't think there's any way out. But reminding people that there are other options, there are other organizations. And I think sometimes when you feel that way, you feel like you're stuck because various different reasons, like you have the mortgage to pay, you have, maybe the kids are in private school or they're going to college or something, that, there's always an excuse to stay in a place that is not really serving you very well. But let this be a reminder that you always have a choice, and whether that's choosing to stay where you are for various different reasons or choosing to leave because you want something better, you want to have a greater impact, or you want to reduce the negative impact that you're having on the world, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And again, it's that word choice. And when somebody's feeling stuck, they don't realize that they're choosing to stay where they are in that
Mm,
job, for example. They
yeah,
don't see that as choice, and yet it
exactly. Yeah,
actually is.
yeah,
Um, and there are always other options, but there is a need to empower people past the stuckness and to see choice. And very often what I'm seeing, I suppose, is that when the world doesn't believe in women, it's hard for the woman to believe in herself.
mm,
And you know, if we don't believe in ourselves, that will be reflected back to us, because we tend, if I don't value myself, then others aren't going to value me either.
yeah,
And so again, it comes back to kind of supporting people to do the inner work so that their outer world can change, and then that they're more empowered and feeling stronger and feeling more confident to change their situation. And when they're in a better situation, they're going to help others to change their situation too. So it has that kind of knock-on effect. So again, you have, people at all levels maybe feeling stuck, maybe feeling trapped in a job, hearing the negativity, feeding into the fear. Or, if they've been working in an organization for a long time, we simply become quite institutionalized and unaware. We take for granted our own skill set. We don't realize that we have done some learning, and we have done some growing, and we have some experience under our belt. So again, it's like you often need that other person, whether that's a coach or whether that's a supportive colleague or a leader, or mentor, or a counselor if there's other stuff coming in for you. It often takes that kind of outside perspective, because they will often believe in you when you don't.
Mm.
They will often see the good in you, and you need somebody to see the good in you when you even can't,
Yeah.
or to see possibilities and options for you when you can't. And so when we're trapped and we're feeling stuck, we're not seeing any perspective. And so it's to empower people really past that point, and then they can do the same for others, and help others along.
This is it. This is it. Niamh, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
In a nutshell, for me, what it means is doing what you love and loving what you do. Um, and you didn't, we went into different areas there, but I think meaning and purpose, that sense of
Mm.
meaning and purpose, are becoming more and more important post
Yeah.
COVID. And working, being, I suppose, being supported to work to our strengths, to recognize who we are, what we bring to the table, and being allowed to develop our potential in that way. If we're working to our strengths, you can you can excel, you go into huge potential. Whereas if everybody's always focusing on, oh well, you need to improve this and you need to improve that, and really they're not your strengths, you're only ever
Mm.
going to be average and feel average and perform average. So for me, being happier at work is that, doing what you love what you're doing, and having balance and having time for those non-work priorities too,
Yeah.
because you're a whole being. You're not just a worker bee. And really coming back to that word we've used a few times, Aoife, is more choice in how you run your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this. And Niamh, if people want to reach out, if they want to connect with you, if they want to find out more about what you do, what's the best way they can do that?
My website is niamhhannan.com, niamhhannan.com. I'm active on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Probably the easiest one is Niamh Hannan on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, that's where I'm probably most active. So I'd love to hear from your listeners. Send me a message, ask me a question if there's anything that you've not understood or that doesn't make sense, or that you have a disagreement with, even from what I said today. I also, Aoife, I offer currently, I'm offering core purpose sessions, free sessions, to help people to really get clear and a defined purpose statement for themselves, which
Mm.
really resonates, not just from a head level, but from a heart and gut level. Um, so people can come along to those sessions for free. They're usually on a Wednesday evening. I'll have dates set up for the new year. And then I have a couple of new programs for the new year. So I have a core circle for female leaders that's more Ireland based, because some of that is in person, and it's really a circle of trust. It's for your own personal and professional development. But I'm also on that purpose and meaning side of things. I have a new program which will be starting up at the end of February, called my legacy program, helping people to develop their legacy, where we'll do the
Wow.
inner work, but also some outer work, so that people are actually taking action and putting a plan in place.
Yeah, love that. Because I think like everyone wants to leave a legacy, don't they? Or maybe not
Well, we have
everyone,
to be
but a
careful,
certain,
because I mean,
yeah.
Putin is leaving a legacy right
Uh,
now. Hitler left a legacy, so we have to be conscious. And again,
a
now,
positive
yeah,
legacy.
a positive impact. Yeah, we
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
do that. But again, people aren't thinking about that so much when they're 20. It's often a certain stage in
yeah.
life when people have already satisfied their basic needs,
Mm,
and then they begin to look outwards and begin to look at, how can I make a difference.
yeah.
um, so yeah, so I've just been picking up a lot of that from people coming to me, or from conversations, and from what people are looking for. And I've been doing a lot of work in that area for myself. So yeah, putting together a 3-month program, which will be totally online, so it can be more international as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Niamh. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. Got very philosophical at times, but I think for anyone who's kind of listening, hopefully a lot of what we talked about will really resonate in terms of how we as individuals can change the world of work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aoife. My pleasure.